Hi, everybody, and welcome to Love Fraud Live. Sociopaths do not feel shame. Psychology researchers have known this for decades, and I personally witnessed this total lack of shame in my disordered ex-husband. I'm Donna Anderson, author of lovefraud.com and host of the True Lovefraud Stories podcast. After betrayal by a sociopath, I help you to understand what happened, put down the emotional burden, and move forward. Tonight, I will explain sociopaths and how they play the shame and blame game. At the end of my short presentation, I'll answer your questions. Please subscribe to Love Fraud Live. If you do, you'll be notified about all of my upcoming YouTube videos. Okay, let's get started. The con man that I married, James Montgomery, was originally from Australia. He told me that he served in Australian Special Forces during the Vietnam War and won the Victoria Cross, which is the country's highest military honor. I believed him. So did everybody else. My ex-husband was invited to talk to school children about his experiences in the military. He did it. I was there. When we split up, I realized that Montgomery was scamming me for money. He went back to Australia, and when I learned that he lied to me about everything, I became suspicious about all his war stories. I sent his military documents to an Australian organization that investigated stolen valor. So, guess what? All of Montgomery's documents were fake. My ex-husband had never served in the military. At all, never. The organization busted him on their website and then tipped off an Australian tabloid newspaper. A few days later, a photo of my ex-husband was on the front page. He was wearing his fake medals and marching in an Australian military parade. And here was the headline, "Meet Major Fraud." So, the reporter did talk to Montgomery for the story, and my ex did not miss a beat. He said that his documents were part of a secret government project to prove how easy it was to impersonate a veteran. They were never supposed to be made public, but I let them out. In other words, the whole situation was my fault. And there you have it. That's the sociopathic shame and blame game. Sociopaths, including narcissists and psychopaths, should feel shame given their numerous and unending failures, infractions, violations, and crimes. But they accept no responsibility for their bad behavior. Instead, they blame us. And unfortunately, we often accept the blame, so we're the ones feeling the shame. Shame is the unpleasant, unsettling emotion that we feel when we discover a defect in ourselves. Although we feel badly, shame can be constructive. It can motivate us to learn, improve, or make amends. This is healthy shame. Toxic shame, however, is destructive. We feel weak, pathetic, and worthless. Sociopaths never feel healthy shame, and they push us to feel toxic shame. At the most basic level, shame is a defense mechanism, according to experts. It enables us to learn how to keep ourselves safe from harm. This was important in our caveman days when survival depended on being part of the group. If we behaved in a way that got us expelled from the group, we were doomed. So, shame is integral to human functioning in society. Healthy shame is associated with values and self-evaluation. We feel shame when we don't live up to our own standards or the standards and values of our society. And the way we alleviate shame is by making corrections. At least that's what normal people do. So what about sociopaths? Well, my friend and colleague, the love fraud author Dr. Liane Leedom, documents that classic experts on psychopathy, including Hervey Cleckley, who wrote The Mask of Sanity, and Robert Hare, these experts observed that because psychopaths are incapable of feeling shame, they blame other people for their problems. Now, in Dr. Leedom's view, sociopaths don't feel shame and blame others for problems because of their excessive dominance motivation. She says that sociopaths and psychopaths live for power and control. Therefore, they cannot afford to admit any weakness or error, not even to themselves. Sociopaths do not feel shame themselves, but they seem to understand how painful it is for the rest of us. So they go to great lengths to make us, their targets, feel ashamed. This is no longer healthy shame. It's toxic shame, the kind that eats away at our souls. And how do they do this? They engage in relentless criticism. They may pretend to be concerned about our weaknesses or shortcomings, but in reality, they're putting us down. And then when there are problems, any kind of problem, they blame us. We sense that we are being treated unfairly, but because we are responsible human beings and unaware of the sociopath's evil motivations, we're willing to consider that maybe we are at fault. Maybe we do need to make corrections. So we try. But our corrections are never good enough for the sociopath. They keep moving the goalposts. They keep finding more flaws to criticize in us. And eventually, we experience toxic shame. Then something worse happens. We figure out that the person has a personality disorder, and then we blame ourselves for getting involved with him or her. Marianne Glynn is a licensed clinical social worker and addressed this in an article on love fraud. She wrote that when it's clear how this person that you loved violated your trust, tricked and betrayed you, you somehow keep bringing the fault back to yourself. You ask yourself, what was I doing there in the first place? How could I have been so weak? Why did I stay so long? Maybe you have experience with those questions. We end up torturing ourselves with these questions. We are consumed with feelings of shame and guilt to the point where it's toxic, but not to the sociopath, only to us. Eventually, after continuous doses of shame and blame, we're a hot mess. We lose confidence in ourselves. We believe that we are fundamentally flawed. We're not even sure of who we are anymore. So, now what? How do we turn this around? How do we recover ourselves? Well, the key is to understand the sociopath's shame and blame game. They do not feel shame so that when things go wrong, someone else must be blamed. It's just what they do. And when you understand their game, you can stop playing it. Then you rebuild yourself by recognizing the truth. They are the problem and not you. So if you're stuck in a shame cycle, you might want to check out a love fraud webinar presented by Mandy Friedman, which is called Overcoming Shame: How to Feel Worthy of Love and Respect. Mandy does a great job of explaining the destructive effects of shame, 6 ways that abusive people use shame, and 9 strategies for overcoming shame, and more. There's a link in the window below this video. So that's the presentation for tonight. If you're dealing with a psychopath, antisocial, or narcissist, reach out to me. I can help you to understand what happened, put down the emotional burden, and move forward. For more information, please visit lovefraud.com/talk to Donna. So now I'll answer your questions. Please go ahead and type your comments and questions into the chat, and feel free to ask anything, whether it's related to this presentation or not. Oh, wow. We have comments today. Terrific. Okay, so Katie asks, do sociopaths feel shame when they are caught in a lie? It seems like my sociopathic father keeps gaslighting me every time I catch him in a lie. The short answer is no. They do not feel shame when they're caught in a lie. They might be aggravated, they might be annoyed, they might be angry. And so typically what they'll do is either blame you for misinterpreting it and deny that there ever was a lie, or they'll come up with some other excuse, or they'll continue to pile more lies on top of the lie that you discovered. So it just keeps going on and on and on. The idea is that, as we said before in the presentation, what they're looking for is power and control. And so they will do or say anything in order to maintain power and control. And shame has nothing to do with it. It's all about maintaining power and control. And so they'll just say whatever they have to. They'll continue to lie, any of those things. I'm sure you've experienced all of that. And the idea is, at the end of the interaction, whatever it may be, they just want to make sure that they end up on top, that they're in a superior position, that they're lording it over you, and it doesn't matter what they say, whether it's true or not. So they will just say what they want, and but no, there is no shame involved in that. Okay, so Ted says they externalize and outward project shame. They do not metabolize shame. Well, you could say it that way. I'm not even sure, though, that it gets that far. I mean, it's not. Of course, it also depends who you're talking about. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that if you look at the actual diagnostic criteria for the different disorders that I refer to when I talk about sociopaths, and as a reminder, when I use the term sociopath, I'm using it as an umbrella term that covers antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, histrionic, and psychopathic personality disorders. And so I refer to them collectively as sociopaths, which is how the word was originally meant to be used. But anyway, when you look at the specific diagnostic criteria, for the PCLR, which is the diagnostic criteria for psychopaths, one of the traits is, well, two of the traits, they say they have a lack of remorse or guilt and a lack of empathy. And for antisocial personality disorder, they also say there's a lack of remorse and they are indifferent or rationalizing. There is no discussion of shame in any of the diagnostic criteria. It's just kind of implied by what they do say about lack of remorse. And at least that's for the psychopaths and the antisocials. Now, narcissists don't even go there. I mean, they don't mention anything about shame, and there's nothing about a lack of remorse. So there are people who tend to think that those who could be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder behave the way they do because they actually are covering up their shame for their inadequacies. Some people think that. I personally did not witness that. So maybe that's what you're referring to, is that if you're talking about a narcissist, maybe they are projecting shame that they feel and they can't tolerate it, so they project it on someone else. Possibly, but there's not the discussion of shame in reference to narcissists. A lot of people, even a lot of experts, tend to think that they do feel shame and they're trying to cover it up. Maybe it's true, but my ex was diagnosed as a psychopath, so I didn't observe that firsthand. but that could be what you might be referring to. Okay, so Katie says that her dad kept lying even in the face of court documents. Yep, yep. It's kind of amazing how they do it. My ex-husband, he actually had in a court document that I was violent to him. I've never been violent in my life, but didn't bother him. He said that in a court document. And I've heard of plenty of people who have been caught red-handed. I've heard of people who, caught their sociopathic partner in bed with another woman and then, denied that it was even happening. And it's just shocking how they just kind of roll on and just keep going, despite whatever evidence you may have. For example, there's some more information about my experience with my ex-husband. I told you about how we busted him. The Australian, the group was called. Anyhow, they researched stolen valor. So what they did was they had all these people who would track down what people's claims were and everything, and they ended up busting my ex-husband. So it didn't bother him at all. Now, the next thing that happened was shortly after I learned that he had been exposed as a military fraud, I got a call from a guy who was head of the Rotary Club in Bathurst, Australia, where my ex-husband was. And he was very concerned about what was in the newspaper because if it was true, they had a problem because they had invited my ex-husband to speak to the Rotary Club on the topic of ethics in business. Yeah, okay. The con man is talking about ethics in business to a Rotary Club. Well, needless to say, he lost that gig. And then he also, at that point, had a job at a university helping to manage their radio station. Well, he got fired from that job, which was also in the newspaper. And they had, that headline was marching orders for major fraud. And then he also had to give up his volunteer position in a mineral museum. So all this is going on. And in the meantime, well, actually, many years later, I was in touch with his wife, the woman that he married after me, while he was still married to me. So that was bigamy. But anyway, she was there when all this happened. And she said none of it fazed him at all. It didn't matter that he was, ostracized in the newspaper and everybody was talking about it and everything didn't bother him at all. And that's just the way they are. They have absolutely no shame. Okay, so all right, so Ted is saying the most evil and destructive thing that these people do is their projection of their own personal traumas and their blah, 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 lies and their chaos onto other people. And he also says they're always going to lie and move the goalposts. Yes, but one thing that I'd like to say here is that it's not necessarily that they're projecting their own traumas, okay? I mean, one of the things that a lot of people do until you really get used to how these people behave, a lot of us will try to interpret how a sociopath or psychopath or narcissist behaves by comparing it to how we would behave and by, looking at it through the lens of normal human behavior. And that's actually not the best approach. I mean, the key to understanding these people is to understand that they are fundamentally different from the rest of us. I mean, they are wired in different ways. And, so the ways that they think is totally different. And the main example of that is that they literally do not have the ability to love. So consequently, what happens, they have no concern at all about what happens to other people. And they're, perfectly comfortable doing whatever they want. They feel entitled to do whatever they want. And so what that means is that when they are acting badly, it's not necessarily because they are projecting their own personal trauma. It's because they want to. It's because they feel entitled to. And they have no consideration for other people. And so they just do what they please. And, don't worry about who gets hurt in the process. So that's a key thing to understand, is that, to really come to terms with what they are means understanding that they're almost like a different species. In fact, there are actually people I've heard of, and I have no evidence of this, but there are people who believe they're a different species, that they're descended from aliens or something like that. But, I don't know if we want to go that far, but the key is that they are so fundamentally different, because, as Dr. Leedom says, their prime thing is dominance, power, and control. This is the only thing that really drives them. I mean, they get no satisfaction out of human connection. The only thing that gives them satisfaction is exerting power and control over others, being the winner, being on top, being the boss, being in a superior position. And, that coupled with the idea that they have no qualms at all about anything, that they feel entitled to do whatever they want, it is like a different species. So, I guess what I'm saying is, by suggesting that they're projecting trauma, you're kind of cutting them some slack, assuming that they have a problem, and because they have a problem or they had a misfortune or something, that's what's making them behave badly. And where the reality of it is that they want to behave badly. This is just what they want to do. Okay. So Marina just agrees with me. She says that they know exactly what they're saying, not saying or doing it. And that's exactly right. All of this is intentional. Everything, when they are engaging in abusive behavior, they know that they're doing it and it's intentional. So another thing that would be good to bring up in this discussion is the idea of guilt versus shame. And a lot of therapists explain that guilt, we feel guilty when we did something bad. It's related to an experience or something that we did. And the idea of shame is that we are bad. And that's far more destructive. That's the way a lot of people or a lot of therapists explain the difference between guilt and shame. So if that's the case, then perhaps instead of saying healthy shame, you might say guilt. But it gets kind of mixed up. But anyway, I did want to throw that content out there. But also, sociopaths can go out of their way to make us feel guilty. In fact, I did a podcast a few months ago, and the title of the podcast is, he said he'll kill himself because of me. And in this particular podcast, this young woman, told the story of what she went through with a guy, who she was married to. And he was always doing things to make her feel guilty and to make her feel like everything was her fault and she was misinterpreting and she didn't, wasn't doing things right or whatever. And one of the ways that he played the guilt card was the suicide card. He always used to say, "Oh, you're going to make me kill myself. And if I kill myself, it's because of you." And then he would go into, "Look at this, here I am, I've got the knife in my hand." And he would tell her all this stuff. And of course, she feels terrible. And she was believing that it was all her fault until she finally came out of it. And I followed that particular episode up with another episode of True Lovefraud Stories, in which I interviewed Mandy Friedman, who's the woman that I suggested the webinar. She does the webinar about overcoming shame, but she also makes the point that guilt is a red flag. And she says that anytime someone is making you feel guilty, or anytime that you do feel guilty, you really want to examine that and figure out if it's if you deserve it or if somebody is manipulating you. So more food for thought. The difference between guilt and shame. Yes, sometimes we do bad things, sometimes we screw up, and we may feel guilty or ashamed of that. But you really need to figure out, is this an opportunity for me to make a correction, or is somebody putting me down? So whenever you feel either shame or guilt, it's probably, you probably need to examine why and whether or not you actually deserve to feel that way. Okay, let's see. All right, so I was just talking about True Lovefraud Stories, so I would love for you to check out the podcast. You can get it wherever you listen to your podcast. In this show, survivors tell their own outrageous stories of betrayal, and then I interview experts to address issues that were raised in the stories, as I just explained. So you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google, here on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, please go ahead and subscribe to Love Fraud Live. When you do subscribe, you'll automatically be notified about all my new videos. Plus, by subscribing, you'll boost the distribution of Love Fraud Live. And that way, you'll help to spread the word about these dangerous sociopaths who live among us. You'll find a lot of helpful links in the window below this video. Okay, so that's what we have for tonight. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week for the next episode of Love Fraud Live. Good night.